folks. My name is Doug Haney. I'm Executive Director of Polyphony Music Resources, and I want to welcome you to this video conversation today with two esteemed colleagues. Andy Stoker is pastor of Central United Methodist Church in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Jernberg Scalfaro is pastor of Calvary Baptist Church in Denver, Colorado. I'm coming to you from Rock Hill, South Carolina. We're 2 time zones different this morning, but we are ready to have an engaging and hopefully instructive conversation about pastor-musician working relationships. Andy, welcome. Welcome to the Polyphony community, and thank you for your time today. I want to preface our conversation by just referencing one thing, that is setting up a little context about why have this conversation. In the last couple of years, Polyphony has conducted a research initiative called the Harmony Project, where we interviewed 100 church musicians, and we asked them in hour-long interviews what they need to thrive and flourish in their life and ministry as they look at the decade ahead. One of the themes that emerged from almost all of these 100 conversations is that in order to flourish, musicians need positive and productive work relationships, especially with their pastor or supervisor. Now, in one sense, you may say, well, of course, right? But there really is a sense of aspiring and dreaming of and hoping for this sort of positive, productive relationship for the sake of the musician, for the sake of the pastor, for the sake of the congregation. And so this conversation today is to dream together and to speak into that sort of context and say, well, how can we do better at these things? Because truth is, sometimes things go sideways. So such is life. Yeah. So let's just jump in. Ann or Andy, just generally talk a little bit about the role of music and worship in the life of a congregation. How important is this from the chair that you sit in? Ann, you want to start?
Sure. On the broader level, I think of worship as sort of the heartbeat of church life. It's the place where we all gather together. It's the anchor. I think of it as an orienting or reorienting, every week for people to sort of remind ourselves, right, I'm connected to God, I'm connected to others, I'm connected to myself. And so within that framework of worship being this important container and gathering space and connection point, music, it's the thread. I mean, it's the thread that weaves the entire service together, at least in my context, from the chiming of the hour all the way through to the postlude. And music kind of creates these intros and outros to every spoken word piece of the service. And so it's a really intricate element in worship that's so important. And of course, music does something the spoken word can't do in terms of how it touches the soul and speaks to people. So I have no other way to say it other than it's of utmost importance, and it is what we do in so many ways.
Lovely. Andy, thoughts?
So good, Ann. And before I offer my thoughts, a word of thanks to you, Doug, for number one, connecting me with Ann. What a great gift of collegiality in the larger Christian community. Thank you so much. And thanks for your continued friendship with me and support of me in my years of ministry, Doug. It means far more than you'll ever imagine. So I'm really grateful to be on this call and to imagine next steps as worship is, as Ann mentioned, absolutely the crux of a community, and that music as the thread does connect us. From a United Methodist perspective, music is absolutely essential in the proclamation of the gospel. For those of you who are not United Methodist, there was there were two brothers named John and Charles Wesley. John was a grizzled, very mean-spirited, driven kind of guy, and Charles, his brother Charles, was jovial and
Hmm.
kind and loving.
Huh.
John was the reformer. Charles was the one who built out an understanding of how music could play a role not only inside worship, but also outside of worship. So today, in the 21st, leaning into the 22nd century, music does the very same thing in worship. It enables us to see what metaphors did work before and how it could play a role in aspects of the tradition, and how new metaphors emerge because music can be the one element that really promotes and purports this new higher level of living, being, and even doing the Christian life. So I'm yeah, Anne said it beautifully about this present context. And here at Central United Methodist Church, this is the fourth church I've served. So here at Central United Methodist Church, it's a totally different process, which I don't know. Ann and Doug, hopefully our conversation will touch on this, but music is the life of the musician and the pastor is absolutely essential. And music has a tradition in its context in a congregation or church. So I'm hopeful that that emerges too as part of our
Mhm.
conversation.
Well,
Yeah.
actually, let me pick up on that thread that you've mentioned, Andy. How can especially the senior pastor, create a culture where pastor and musician can thrive? Maybe we land there for just a minute,
Oh, sure,
and then
sure.
then we can come back to maybe the broader congregational context. But let's start with how can pastor and musician thrive together?
I think in so many ways, uh, the pastor musician context or working relationship has been based strangely on an adversarial kind of
Mm,
understanding, like a
mm.
um, you're in my spotlight, or you're not in my, or I'm not paying attention to you, or you're not paying attention to me. That kind of dance, that just doesn't. Uh, to me, that halts a working relationship in uh, in critical ways. Creating a culture whereby a pastor and church musician can thrive is really about knowing and recognizing the gifts each one brings beyond their specific role.
Mhm, mhm.
So, for
Right.
example, I want to be seen as a good teacher. Well, how does my teaching role and the thing that gives me passion about teaching, how can that be enhanced by a church musician who has a totally different process of potentially seeing how teaching works? Can I sit at a choir rehearsal and learn something from choir directors
Hmm.
or church musicians, excuse me, that that I can take into the classroom, that I can take into my
Huh.
one-on-one
Interesting.
conversations, and begin to see how those two roles um, are woven together in really substantive ways. Uh, so the church musician also potentially has this understanding that their role is also proclamation, not just performance.
Mhm.
So if if the pastor and church musician role is both proclamation, then it is about a full enhancement of right and left brain. It is the full enhancement of the fullness of humanity, head, heart, and soul, that can build on this culture of wholeness. So and anything that
Yeah.
you'd respond to that, or
I'm just saying amen to everything you are saying, Andy. It's really excellent. I mean, what you're talking about is respect of the profession coming from both sides, and also respect of the whole person, somebody's personhood, seeing them beyond just the individual context, which I think is important for all of us to thrive in any setting. And so, yes, I mean, our director of music has sat in a Bible study that I've taught. I've been at choir rehearsals or choir parties, seeing each other in those elements. Also, I think going to coffee and not talking about worship or something like that, asking how they're doing. I also think that church musicians, because they're working with lay musicians all the time of varying skills, and often the church musician is a professional, right? And I know in my context, with my musician, it's really important for him to be able to sing in some professional gigs and have professional development opportunities where he may be leading, but often he's a singer in an amazing choir somewhere else, and he's able to get filled in that way. So honoring in the same way that you and I, Andy, might go to a pastor's conference or something like that, that might look a little bit different for what that means for a musician, and to advocate for that on behalf of our staff relations or personnel committee, whatever that may be in our context. And just to add that shared vision of worship, and in our case, we do some theme development for an entire year, and inviting the musician into that space to say, what are you hearing and sensing in the congregation? Where are people struggling? Where's the challenge? Where's the comfort? Getting their wisdom and allowing their voice to help shape the direction of where we're going. Because again, they're tapped into people I'm not necessarily tapped into. They also have insight and musical sort of knowledge that is helpful in so many different ways. And so all of those things help for thriving. And then I'm going to talk about this a lot, just open communication. Communication is so key. Yeah, communication.
I was remembering a time when at Wilshire a number of years ago where let's just say the waters of congregational life were quite turbulent. And, all the staff was navigating their personal and our collective anxiety about these times, even though these were important matters to move through. I remember sitting at worship planning, knowing what heavy lifting our senior pastor, George Mason, was doing, and adding my perspective. This is a time we need some musical comfort food, because everything else, it feels like everything else is swirling in the system, and not that singing a good old hymn is going to fix anything, because we just had to forge through, but there was a sense in which we needed some things that just fed the soul along the way. And I guess a sensitive church musician can be aware that there are times where the pastor is really doing some heavy lifting, and there are some things that music can do to calm the savage beast, or as David calmed the spirits of his predecessor. But we digress. Let's go back to thinking about the larger context. What do you wish musicians would understand about your role in the staff and congregational system? Let's come to that perspective just for a minute before we dive deeper. Anne, you want to start?
Sure.
What do you wish musicians could understand, and they may not?
Yeah. To some extent, I think it's hard to understand each other fully. I'm an Enneagram 4, so to not be understood is a big deal to me. So, but I do think probably if I had to narrow it down to one thing, and this could be an assumption on my part, but I think it's probably accurate. A church musician, while also engaged in relationality and pastoral care on some levels, there is a singularity of focus for a musician in terms of they might have multiple ensembles or choirs, but it's all leading toward this Sunday worship service and how they create music together and how we live into that moment. And yes, there's Christmas programs and things like that, but it's all related to music. Whereas I think pastors, senior pastors, on any given day, we are wearing a number of hats, pivoting from worship to a budget meeting to a pastoral care visit to something breaking in the building, some other conflict with somebody. And it's just a constant pivoting. And there is a constant like level of responsibility of many different areas. And so I think just the awareness that when I walk into a worship planning meeting, or I walk in even worship Sunday morning, I could have been already walking in from any number of different spaces, not
Mm-hmm.
just from my home, but from related to church ministry. And
Mm-hmm.
I think an acknowledgement that if I'm a little bit distracted or if I'm not totally zoned in, it's because of that, those different levels of responsibility.
Mm-hmm. And therein points to the importance of those, maybe those coffee conversations
Yeah,
that happened where you built trust and relationship and you didn't talk about church at all, perhaps,
right.
but you just learned to value each other as colleagues and peers, so that we give one another grace.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Andy, you want to add anything to that? Just thinking systemically.
Yeah, I think Ann said it so well. Oh, by the way, I'm an Enneagram 7. If we're Enneagramming, we can just Enneagram away. Um, as a 7 and as a senior leader in multiple settings, I would love church musicians to know that they are not forgotten.
Hmm.
Uh, that seems to be a quintessential kind of as if church musicians are afterthoughts
Mm-hmm.
um, on be it a budget meeting or a pastoral care call, etc. I will often bring uh, a musical piece into a hospital setting. um, what do you miss most about being in church? I know you've been in rehab or you've had this surgery and you've been so on and so forth. I had a call last week, as a matter of fact. A woman had knee replacement surgery. She's doing great, but just doesn't want to come to church with a walker. Okay, that's
Okay.
fine. And so she said, I really miss the music. And I said, Jan, are you on Facebook? And she said, Yes. I said, Every Wednesday, we put a little musical piece on our Facebook page, and you can scroll all the way through and you can listen to all the music you want. And so, it's those moments. She didn't say, Oh, Andy, I miss your brilliant sermons, how you rap such wonderful prose, and your exegesis is just so high. Can you send me clips? No, church musicians are not forgotten. In budget meetings, oftentimes, if a little, for example, I don't know that this is ever true anywhere in any church. If it is, stop me. But there are oftentimes designated funds that people set aside and only donate for music ministry outside or beyond the budget. Anybody have that experience?
Yeah.
Oh, everybody has that experience.
Yeah.
So all of the sudden, in a budget meeting, especially when you're looking at budget and designated funds, there is a critical point where a pastor has to justify what is in a budget, even though a designated fund is far exceeds what that budget number is. And so, how do you navigate this?
Hmm.
And the church musician needs to know that that is a precarious place to be in. And oftentimes, church musicians are top of mind because in our culture, it is performance. And once again, it's performance, not proclamation. So, didn't the choir sing well? Wasn't that a beautiful piece? Instead of, didn't the ark of worship indicate to us that there was teamwork, that there was some moment, some prescient moment in the life of the totality of that worship service, that we could use all of our faculties to lift up a larger vision, a larger way of being. And I think church musicians need to know that beyond the performance, there is a want from pastors to be better team players and want to be in broader conversations about how music plays a role in the church's life.
Yeah, yeah. Well, exactly to that point, how do we collaborate in worship design, and how do music and preaching work together? Whatever we think those spheres are, proclamation, prayer, praise, whatever, collaboration. Let's talk a little bit about worship design. Now we're sort of getting to nuts and bolts, right? Because Sunday is always coming. Right, right, right. Andy, you want to start, and then we'll toss it back to Ann.
Absolutely. So yeah, Doug, I think in some ways this is incumbent on the pastor
Mm,
because of what Ann indicated about a more generalist approach to the pastoral seat. I think it's incumbent on us to be on pastors to be far more prepared and maybe even long range preparation
mm.
for what it looks like to lead the congregation to these moments of grace, to these moments of critical conversations, etc. For example, I've served in churches that have had a wonderful tradition of choral music, and there was an expectation that certain Sundays we sang certain songs. Um, and so that's fine, um, but that's not tradition. That's traditionalism. And
Mm.
traditionalism is just another ism. Just like racism or sexism, heterosexism, it's just another
Ageism.
ism. Ageism, yeah.
I'm
Ableism.
I'm particularly sensitive to that these days. Okay, a little humor there.
Yeah. So, um, uh, if pastors could be able to see beyond this upcoming Sunday, and I'm
Mm,
not talking about sermon series, I'm talking about what in the life of the
mm,
congregation needs to be needs to be proclaimed. It's an election year. We're recording this middle of July, 2024. It's an election year. What do we need to speak into
mm,
this, and how do we need to lead our congregation for them not to just check their gospel at the voting booth, but how do we fully engage their political life and their spiritual life, and maybe even hold that intention long enough. It may be that special Sunday for that special song that we've sung for the last 32 years,
mm.
but it may have to wait till next year.
Right, right,
It
right, right.
may have to wait because there's a larger purpose at play. And I think for pastors, it's about planning, long range planning. It's about, I love the communication piece, and it's this constant communication. This is what I'm seeing and sensing. This is where we can go. It's an election year. The United Methodist Church is having another general conference. We have
Mm,
transition in leadership. We've had a number of deaths in our congregation. We've had a number of births in our congregation. Whatever the transition is, good, bad, or indifferent, speaking into the totality of the human experience enables us to get out of traditionalism and be able to and allow the Christian tradition to be the foundation whereby people can live, breathe, play, pray, and move.
yeah. And what are some ways at your place at Calvary do you and David collaborate and communicate as you strive to work together?
Yeah. Again, really appreciate what Andy offered, and I've learned the importance of advanced planning with musicians, and not just, as a pastor, to some extent, sermon development, exegesis, writing is an independent process. We
Mm,
might have a series planned out or something, but if I'm last minute on my sermon this week because of a whole bunch of other things, it's okay. Musicians have to rehearse with choirs for several weeks to prepare anthems. And so, on a very basic level, it shows respect for musicians' craft and their profession and what they do to be as far out as planned, as you can be on a high level. And speaking exactly to what Andy's talking about, it's not just what's the lectionary, what's the text. what is the sermon direction? It's about we always ask in worship planning, what do we want people to walk away with this Sunday? Is it a challenge because it's something related to social justice? Is it comfort because we've just been through something really difficult? Is it perhaps just some curiosity, a new way of thinking about something? What do we want them to walk away with? And then we back up from there to say, how can we best achieve that? So if it's a Sunday where we want to offer comfort to the congregation because we've just lost a couple of members in a tragic way or something like that, it's going to be a heavier service on music and silence, prayer and ritual. If it's a Sunday where there's a real deep challenge and we know it's going to make some folks uncomfortable, well, we might counter that with a comfort hymn. So we see music in our worship planning sessions as integral. It's not just where's the sermon going, it's where are we going together.
Right.
And we begin the conversation always by reflecting on the past week, the Sunday we worship plan on Tuesdays, so we think about 2 days before and we say what went well. We even think about transitions. Communion is one of those things that can always be clunky because and so we say, what worked well, or what might we want to think differently about? It's a great chance to affirm each other, to say, I loved that postlude, it was really awesome, or I loved how you did that. So the reflection on what we've done in the past, as well as opening a creative space for all voices to be involved. And David's voice is just as important, what he's sensing. And we're all picking hymns together. It's not like we worship plan and then I send him off to pick. And I veto some things based on theology. I said, I love this tune. I'm not okay with these words. So what can we, what can we do with this?
Or sometimes it's just one verse, right?
One stanza. Always, Doug.
Okay, if we just pull out this, the rest of it is just gold.
Exactly. But anyway, I think it's just honoring equal voices, like around the table.
And I'm hearing both of you talk about honoring people and developing trust and respect, and of course there's a mutuality about that should be. I'll say this to all of my musician colleagues, brothers and sisters out there. There's a reciprocity that we want to aim for here, that will cure a lot of the things that ail us in these matters, though not all. We're going to need to bring our time to a close pretty soon, but what are we aiming for in this positive, productive work relationship? What in your view does this kind of work relationship look like when it's at its best? Anne, you want to start?
Yeah. It looks like joy, I think.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Have you seen Inside Out 2 yet?
I have not yet. I have not.
Oh gosh. Okay.
Okay.
I'll just offer that for what it's worth. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it looks like joy and a beautiful working relationship. To me, I was just thinking about what would capture this. And to me, it's when you can look across the chancel at your church musician and give a glance or a look, and you communicate without words. You know what each other is thinking and what needs to happen in the next moment, a change, a slight modification, or something, because of all the work you've done before, communicating that you know each other well, you respect each other well, you're well planned, and everything is structured and thought out, which allows you to leave room for the Spirit to move. And I feel like if you can get to that place where you can kind of relax into the worship moment, because everything else leading up to that has been well handled and thought through, and you're respecting each other, it's just a really beautiful thing for you as a pastor and a musician, and also for the congregation. They feel that, I think.
Andy?
I love the joy piece. Let me just go ahead and lift up. I am an Enneagram 7. It's a great thing to strive for. Because of my experiences with church musicians, I think I want to strive, and I long to strive for being at ease. We don't have to be so keyed up all the time. that we work
I'm not
for
laughing at you. I'm laughing at me as you say that. So I'm just gonna name it and claim it.
like we work for a voluntaristic organization.
Yeah.
These people have chosen to be here to spend their quote unquote free time on a mostly beautiful Sunday mornings with us. And can we be at ease that our congregation is as much participating and proclaiming the word of life for and with us as much as we perceive we've been doing it for and with them?
Hmm.
Um, is it possible for that to be the ease? Is it possible for us to relax and trust that all that we've put together, all that we've done all week long to build this very moment, now it's about simply being?
Hmm.
And that's and where I think I would soar with joy. I think that'd be
Hmm.
awesome. Um, that this so one I know, Doug, we're running out of time. Quick story.
Sure.
I totally fumbled this last Sunday. Totally fumbled. Couldn't remember where I was in worship or in the worship guide. Couldn't remember what I was in liturgy. Something happened before worship. We were to bless some hymnals that were going to go to Ecuador, but they didn't have enough room in their suitcase. Like, it was the most random thing ever. And I'm like,
Wow.
this is so random. I certainly will remember. And I didn't.
Oh.
And I look around, and my church musician and I look at each other, and it was very different than your imagination. And it was like, you're on first. No, you're on first. No, you're on first. And so, and so to allow the freedom to fall and
Hmm.
fail with grace
Okay.
and laugh and realize that,
Hmm.
yeah, there's a
Yeah.
lot coming at us all the time. Can
Yeah.
we just be at ease and know that I'm not going to throw a church musician under the bus if it's on me? That is, I do not play the blame game like that. As a
Good for
matter of
you.
fact, as a head of the organization, it is always my fault. I'm always gonna say, yeah, let's bring that conflict here. Let's manage that conflict here and allow uh my staff to do what they're gonna do, and let me figure out what the management strategy is, if it needs to be one.
Right. Right. Right.
um,
Right.
and that's what it means to be at ease. Last thing I'll say, Doug, is that the buck stops at the pastor's office,
Hmm.
and the buck only stops, in my experience, 3 or 4 times a year.
Okay.
The buck's not stopping every day.
Yeah.
So I've got 361, 62 days of seeking joy and being at ease. And if my staff can't predict when the buck's got to stop, that's on me.
Hmm.
And so that means frequency of conversations, coffees, lunches, uh, choir parties, popping in at rehearsals to say thank you.
Right.
These these little nuggets that build out this beautiful mosaic, these little maybe uh, uh, stones that build out this beautiful mosaic of our shared life together. That I'm just dropping a stone in so that at the end of the day we have this beautiful way of being with one another.
Lovely.
So
Love that
yeah,
image. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, this has been such a great conversation. I appreciate both of you so very much. My one regret, or as I look back on my career as a full-time musician in a church, is that I never got to really be your musician, Ann or Andy. That would have been so much fun. At least I think it would. No, I'm sure it would. Well, what about final thoughts as we wrap this up? Andy, I'm going to come back to you and then let Ann have the last word. Final thoughts for our listening audience, perhaps.
yeah.
Andy?
Very briefly, since I overspent my time. Very briefly is honesty and trust have a speed, and you can only move as fast as honesty and trust can be built.
Wow.
And so as you're building out, maybe you're beginning anew with the church musician. Maybe that church musician's been there for some time and you're their fourth pastor,
Mhm.
or it's an opportunity to begin again and realize that honesty and trust can only move as fast as it is built. So uh, be at ease and know that it will come. Not everything is adversarial. There's a lot of good work to be done.
Yeah. Yeah.
Smile and laugh along the way, and always fail forward.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Anne,
Yeah, I'll
final
just pick up
thoughts.
pick up. I love that phrase, Andy. And you can't have trust if you're not honest with each other. And so
Mm,
I would say the minute that something starts to not feel right, or maybe something in worship or an approach, it's just rubbing and you start to feel that friction, talk about it immediately. Don't let resentment build.
mhm.
Presume positive intentions from the other person, ask where they're coming from, put in the work and investment. Because to circle back to where we began, if we're saying that worship is the heartbeat or the anchor or the crux of our congregation, and that the pastor and the musician are two of the key people creating this moment with God every week, then this relationship is worth every minute of time, investment, effort. It's one of the most important relationships. And so everything you put into it is going to bear fruit. It matters, I guess is what I would say. And it
Yeah.
will be a benefit to both pastor, musician, and again, a benefit to the church to see that, the health of that relationship.
Thank you so much. Thank you both so very, very much. Yes, it matters. These things matter. And I would just add to your wise words, um, when pastor and musician model a healthy, non-anxious relationship as much as is humanly possible for any two mere mortals, that health will spill over into the life of the congregation. It will not fix every malady, but it will go a long way toward creating an ecosystem of relationships. People get it. People in the pew are smart, they are intuitive, they know when things are going well, when there's harmony, they know when there's dissonance, don't they? We all know. Yeah, yeah. And so blessings on both of you in your respective ministries. And from Polyphony, breathe, bless, and be well, friends.